Hi, I'm LAURICE Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the stories we've been following. Our local Punjabi community lends their support to farming protests in India. Calgary Family Peer Connections is serving families in the Lethbridge area through a free grocery pickup program. And Cornerstone Funeral Home held a virtual candlelight remembrance for loved ones who have passed.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us. Members of the local Punjabi community are supporting the protest happening in India. The India protests are opposing new agricultural laws passed in September that could greatly affect the livelihoods of regional farmers and their families.
What's happening in India now, the government of India introduced a bill, agriculture bill, that will marginalize lots of farmers there and open a big way for big corporations. So what is happening there, they introduced a new law which allow big corporations to come in a market and basically it will lead to lots of exploitation for the farmers, and they won't be able to compete, and because the big corporation, they're allowing for the big corporation to come in and deregulating the current marketing system. So that's a part one of that, the bill. So once the marketing system, which is operating functionally for the last 50 years very well, it will be totally deregulated, and what that will lead to, the poor farmers will lose their revenue and income, and they will totally disappear. So pretty much wiping out lots of family farming.
Calgary Family Peer Connections started out in Calgary but has since then ventured out into Fort Macleod. Today, they tell us how they operate amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and how they are literally feeding hundreds of families in need.
Right now, currently, until January, families, individuals, any persons can come. They drive up during our open hours. They drive up to a staging area. They come in, they bring one piece of ID for every single person that is wanting to register for the program. As they're registering, we have volunteers then that will take their packages out to the vehicle and place them in the vehicle for them, and we keep full social distancing. All of our volunteers are masked, as it is policy, but it's also being safe. We have a small conversation with everybody about the weather, and then we move on to the next person. It's an amazing experience. You do not need to have any income verification because we're not a food bank, we're a mental health nonprofit. When you come, you might receive some pamphlets or resources that we can share from the community that you're from. Right now until Christmas, we are accepting anybody within Southern Alberta, so you don't have to worry if you're living within Willow Creek. Right now, everyone is accepted. We ask that you're only coming once every 7 days, and we're open now just December till December 15th before we take our show on the road.
The numbers that come across here, then the people that come here on a weekly basis are really, really high. And so we see people coming in and driving through that for the pickup and stuff. So we're constantly having to replenish what exactly, with that we're using. So it's like on a constant basis. So we could get, if there could be some groups out there that would like to get together and donate some Christmas gifts for children, we would prefer them unwrapped. You could get a hold of the organization. They can even come and pick them up if need be, or you can drop them off here right at the center.
Cornerstone Funeral Home held their 4th annual candlelight remembrance, but this time virtually. Candles were lit in memory of loved ones that have passed away.
We are honored and humbled to provide an annual memorial that helps people grieve at this very difficult time around Christmas. It is really designed around those that struggle with missing their loved one at this time. The past 3 was a public event that we invited people to come, and they actually attended our facility and enjoyed or were part of a service that we had someone speak at, and we had refreshments after. This year is much different. This is all going to be live streamed this year. There will be no public members attending, but hopefully many watching. We are lighting hundreds of candles that people have called in and give their loved ones names so that we can light one in memory of them. 5 years ago, I lost my wife, and it came to my family the importance of the events, especially Christmas, as being such an important one that you miss that loved one so much. And so when after my wife passed away and my son's mother's, we thought that we really needed to recognize the importance of having an event that others can share their grief and talk about their loved ones in a tangible way.
Well, grieving is a process that takes a long time. It's a process for different people can be short and for others can be long. And it's important that when you grieve, that you grieve in your own special way, that you grieve in a way essentially that takes your own time into consideration. And there's no wrong way and there's no right way to grieve. It's what is right for you, and that's the most important thing. I'm hoping that people will see that there is light. And even in a dark time, when you lose somebody, especially around the holidays, which is one of the most difficult times of year, birthdays, anniversaries, those really special moments. And I hope that people in the end will understand and see that even in a time of darkness, that little light, that little flicker of candle can show you that there is light in darkness.
The former Vancouver Canucks anthem singer spoke at an anti-mask rally on Sunday. Mark Donnelly, who was let go from his position with the team because he agreed to sing "O Canada" at a protest against COVID restrictions, told the group he is standing up against tyranny.
I have made my choice. And what is my choice? To support a side of an argument which is being marginalized and censored concerning existential public protocol. That is, a public protocol both sides feel will, without question, dictate how we continue to live together as a society. It's kind of that simple. For that, it appears I am being marginalized on social media, or so I'm told because I don't go on social media, and in a certain way, censored by an institution I have followed and supported for 50 years and been publicly associated with for 20. As many of you may have heard by now, there are reports that Francesco Aquilini and the Vancouver Canucks, via Twitter, have severed ties with me over my decision to sing "O Canada" at the Freedom Rally today. As I do not use Twitter, I cannot personally confirm that this is true. Neither Mr. Aquilini nor the Canucks organization has contacted me directly before making their alleged public statements.
Supporters turned out in Valdosta, Georgia for President Donald Trump's first political rally since losing the election.
Come on, let's hear it for you Patriots out there.
We're not settling for a loss here. Too much cheating.
We would take a fair election, but this was not a fair election. To think that I saw this poor man go to 5 different places, 4 and 5 places a day, trying to win this election as Biden's hiding in his basement, knowing all along, and he even said it on television, that this was going to be the biggest fraud in history, and he was right, it was.
We're not happy with the way our governor, Secretary of State, and we don't know what are these 2 senators going to be like. We're going to give them our vote, but we're biting our tongue.
Only so that we stay in the majority in the Senate.
Well, I hope he gets the vote out for our 2 Georgia senators, because no matter what, no matter how rigged the system is or was, the only way we stand a chance to have our voice heard is to get out there. And the 2 opposing candidates are simply not what's right for Georgia.
Recapping one of our top news stories, members of the Punjabi community in Lethbridge are supporting the protest happening in India. These protests are opposing new agricultural laws passed in September that could greatly affect the livelihoods of regional farmers and their families. And taking a look at weekend weather. That wraps up a surprisingly beautiful but still windy weekend in December. Just a few clouds overnight with a low of +2 degrees. On Monday, we start the week with mainly sunny skies and a high of 11 degrees. Join us after the break when BCN's Jeanette Rocher interviews the founder of a Christian residential program in Saskatchewan for teen boys called Rock Solid Refuge.
What do you do when you see your teenage son falling deep into addictions like drugs, alcohol, and pornography? A parent could be left feeling overwhelmed and helpless, but there is hope. For over 10 years, Rock Solid Refuge has been the residential program of choice by families as a faith-based solution for 13 to 18-year-olds with addictions, behavior, or substance abuse issues. Joining us today via Skype from Shawnna, Saskatchewan is the founder and executive director of Rock Solid Refuge, Dallas Block. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, even from a distance like this.
Absolutely. Now tell us about what led you to starting Rock Solid Refuge.
My wife and I had gotten involved working with young people in some local churches that we were a part of, worked as a youth pastor for a number of years. And during the time while I was youth pastoring, a young man that I knew, and I knew his family, got caught up in crystal meth. So at 16 years old, he was a crystal meth addict. And his family exhausted all of the resources that were available to them at that time. And because I was a close family friend, I ended up quite involved in that whole journey. And after exhausting all of those resources for a teenager and realizing there's no long-term treatment program, especially Christian-based in Canada, we said, hey, let's see if we can start one. And so that started the journey of starting Rock Solid Refuge.
Amazing. Now tell us why you focus on boys ages 13 to 18 for this residential program.
Yeah, you know, really what it came down to was when you see young people in trouble, you have to start somewhere. And so we started just working with guys, and really our heart is for all young people across Canada that are struggling with life-controlling issues of all kinds. And so, Lord willing, if we get an opportunity, we will work with girls as well, whether on this campus that we currently have or other campuses that God gives us the opportunity to open up across Canada.
And do you know if there's a similar program like this for adolescent girls who are struggling? Why is this, specifically targeted for boys?
As far as we know, parents are having to reach outside of Canada to find a program for teen girls that is, long-term Christian residential treatment based. So it's a huge need, and it's just simply not being met at this time.
That's unfortunate. Now, you mentioned Rock Solid Refuge is faith-based. So what principles are the foundation for this work?
We really look at the principles of responsibility, maturity, and charity as being kind of the foundation of what our goals are for the young people that come into Rock Solid Refuge. And so obviously they're coming for a reason. Things aren't going well in their lives or in their families and their situation. And at some level or another, we want to help them see what their responsibility is. As they grow into young men, we want them to mature and become people who not only see what they need to take care of for themselves, but also see the world around them and where is it that they're supposed to contribute and be productive members of society even, and really be a blessing rather than what their lives were, which was really quite a struggle and a challenge for the people around them. We hold students accountable to honesty and to respect and obedience, and those are kind of foundational principles for us here. And we work primarily through the three basic means of role modeling, relational influence, and authority. And so we see that as kind of like a three-legged stool that we want to keep in balance at all points. We're a highly relational program. But even as we look at those things, being a distinctly Christian program, we see that all through the lens of a Christian worldview, understanding that our God is a God of grace and truth.
Okay, so Dallas, explain maybe what happens when a boy first enters Rock Solid Refuge.
to be honest with you, the first day at Rock Solid Refuge is actually a bit traumatic. For parents, they're bringing their young person, sometimes from across Canada, to this place that many would say is in the middle of nowhere, because Southwest Saskatchewan is a pretty wide open country. And so here they are bringing their young person to our location, and they're really signing them over into the care of people that they don't know. And so it's a pretty traumatic experience actually for the parents. There's often tears, and for the young person, everything that they know is kind of being taken away from them. There's everything that they're familiar with is kind of gone. They lose their cell phone. That's pretty traumatic as well. But we work pretty hard really quickly to help them understand that this is a place that they'll be safe. This is a place where there is relationships. This is a place where people will like them and enjoy working with them. It is a structured environment, but it's a structured environment where they can find help and healing.
I would imagine that's extremely traumatic, because I would imagine some of those kids are there not willingly, right? Like their parents are kind of making them do this, and maybe they're addicted to a drug that they no longer have access to. Like that's got to be crazy hard for the staff too to deal with. You must have addiction specialists and all kinds of stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, every student does sign in, and they recognize that they're kind of in a position where their options are pretty narrow because the struggle and the challenges have gotten pretty drastic in their situation. So they do sign in, but it is, you know, often kind of like a last resort for all of them. And so it is a struggle. And at the end of the day, like I said, you know, our staff work hard relationally as fast as possible. And that's really what becomes kind of the foundation of all the other work that we're able to do with the students, is that they recognize that we really actually do care and we want their best interests. So that really gets us a long ways, actually fairly quickly.
And the boys that come to the refuge, you provide school education, so they're not falling behind even further in school. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, that's been an incredible journey for us as well. We were able to get our accreditation with the Ministry of Education in Saskatchewan really early on in our time of running this ministry. And the Ministry of Education in Saskatchewan has been a great partner in the work that we do. They really get what we do because they understand that the kinds of young people we work with here are the kinds that are falling through the cracks in the public system. And so they're excited to work with us. We have a fully accredited school, grades 7 to 12 we can teach. So whatever grade level that students are in when they come, they just pick up from where they're at. Our teachers assess those things and then just get them going in their education. It's also one of the areas that is the quickest place to see some change happen and some hope come into them. A lot of them have been labeled as maybe not very smart, maybe they didn't do very well in school, but truthfully, it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's opportunity, it's surroundings, it's choices, and now they have that opportunity in a setting that really gives them the ability to succeed in education.
That's very inspiring. Now, Dallas, you also have an equine-assisted therapy program, right? So tell us what the boys learn from this and its impact on them.
Yeah, that's been incredible as well. So we've been able to do horse riding here for a bit, but this past summer we were able to start an actual equine therapy component. And so one of our staff became our full-time equine facilitator. And so when a new student would come in, he would just spend the morning, his first morning would be with our equine facilitator and with horses. And it's just kind of eased that transition incredibly. And so, you know, rather than kind of coming up to lunch their first day, kind of, you know, still not sure about being here and everything, these guys are coming in from outside just excited about what they just got to do, not only with the equine facilitator, but with these animals that are just amazing and incredible creatures.
It's amazing what horses can do, what an animal can do to boost your mood, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how long do the boys stay with you?
We are a 12-month program, and so our program is structured around 6 different levels, and each level just has a different amount of time that is expected of it. But we really believe that lasting change takes time. It's not enough just for them to come off of the substances and that the chemical addiction is broken, but rather lifestyle choices and really a new lifestyle has to come into play. And we also want to work with just fundamental beliefs. And so it's an incredible joy to us when we see the students being willing to wrestle with their fundamental belief system as a way for them to see change come into their lives.
So are the boys that come to you only from Christian homes? Not necessarily, right?
No, we're open to young people coming here from all kinds of backgrounds. So a young person's background has nothing to do with whether or not they'd be accepted into the program here. And we're just excited to get applications of people that are in need and see how we can serve them. There's plenty of times we've had students that have come and, if you gave them a Bible and said, "Can you find the book of Genesis for me?" They'd be like, "I don't know what Genesis is." And that's fine. We're glad to just kind of take a journey with them and explore what the Christian faith is all about.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that you're in the middle of nowhere, so Shawnna, Saskatchewan, but of course you also said that it's not just kids from Saskatchewan that are coming, they're coming from all over Canada. So what's your capacity and are you looking to expand?
Yeah, our capacity is actually just 10 students at this point, so it's a pretty small student body. And yes, we are definitely looking to expand. Really, our greatest challenge with that is just resources. It's financial. We really believe that we have the program, kind of the structure that we would need to expand what we're doing. Finding staff, I think there's people out there that are passionate about what we're doing and would love to come on board with us to be a part of what we're doing here. And facilities can be built. And so our hope is, Lord willing, that we'll be able to build more houses out here. And so, we kind of see the ideal group size as being around 8 students in a group. And so building houses out here so that we would have the capacity of 30 to 40 young people, guys and girls, in fact, would be kind of our ideal to see this site developed. And then we'd love to see an opportunity to open up campuses in other parts of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Now, with a capacity of only like 8 to 10 students, you must have a long waiting list.
Yeah, I mean, the waiting list fluctuates. It goes up and down, but currently, yes, there is a pretty long waiting list right now. So it's really sad when we get phone calls and we say, well, it's going to be a few months before we have a bed available. We are actually working right now to open up 4 extra beds even in the new year. So we're hoping that in January we'll have 4 extra beds to offer. We have a house on our campus that we're going to repurpose into a transition house. And so we'll be able to at least serve 4 more. And Lord willing, as resources come in, we will expand and work with more young people.
Right. Do you have any success stories that you could share?
Yeah, a couple of them that come to mind right away are, right now we have 4 either staff or interns that are previous students from here. And so, 4 of these young people that we had in our program, they graduated. Some of them went on to other things and then came back as full-time staff. We have a couple of interns as well. And it's just incredible to see them come into this place and want to give of themselves for the good of the young people that come into it, which really fits our model of, responsibility, maturity, and charity, right? And so they become a really amazing example to the students that are in the program as well. Another couple of just amazing success stories, and this is really the heart of what we do, which is 2 of our guys that are here right now recently gave their hearts to the Lord Jesus Christ. And so those are just some of those moments where you're like, this is why we do what we do. And one of those guys shared in a church just recently that we did a presentation in, and part of what he put into his presentation was he was just amazed at how God has changed his desires, that he wants to do things differently. He doesn't want to go back to the old way that he was, even though he knows when he first came to Rock Solid, he just wanted to get through it and get back to his old life. That's not his desire anymore. So those are those times when we're just so amazed by what God is doing in this place.
So Dallas, how can viewers help your cause in rescuing teenaged boys from addictions?
check us out online. rocksolidrefuge.com is our website. We've actually got a lot of resources there as well. So parents who might be struggling with a teenager, maybe it's not to the point where you need kind of some residential treatment or something like that. We also have some other resources that are available for parents. We want people to get familiar with who we are and what we offer in some of those ways as well. We also really do need financial partners. We have a student sponsorship program called Partner for Change. You'll find that on our website. We need monthly donors as well as one-time donors to help us. And hey, you know what? We're going into the Christmas season. We really want to be giving families the opportunity to have hope. So if you're really enjoying some great family time, remember those who are having more of a struggle of it. You might be in crisis. And we're helping a lot of those situations.
Thank you so much, Dallas, for your time. It looks like we are out of time, unfortunately, but Dallas Block with Rock Solid Refuge out of Shawnavin, Saskatchewan. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
COVID-19 has not only impacted our health, but also disrupted relationships and businesses. Our guest today believes that now is the time to see the workplace not just as a paycheck, but as a place to demonstrate truth and the reality of faith. But how do we do this when our world is so hostile right now to Christian values, or appeared hostility? David Gill is the author of 9 books, one of which we're featuring today called Workplace Discipleship 101, and he joins me now from Oakland, California via Skype. David, welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
Now, you start out by distinguishing between the workplace and the marketplace. What's the real difference here?
Well, what I'm really interested in is what does our faith, what does our confession that Jesus is Lord mean for our work? Okay, and a lot of things have been written about this. It's kind of a movement of the last 30 or 40 years. Some of the literature talks about marketplace ministry, and some of it talks about theology of work and that kind of thing. I prefer talking about workplace discipleship because marketplace puts the emphasis on the exchange, buying and selling, exchanging, trading, and that is important work. We want Jesus to be Lord of our market activities, but there are a lot of things in the workplace that are, for example, raising children, that's not a matter of the marketplace. It's a matter of us exerting ourselves to try to deliver products and services that glorify God. So I view everybody works. Some of them work in marketing. A lot of times we hope we get paid for our work, but just being paid doesn't make it work. Work is where we put out an effort to create products and services that glorify God and meet the needs and sometimes the wants of people, of our neighbors and people around us.
So what are some of the major challenges people face in today's world in being a workplace disciple?
Well, I think, externally speaking, of course, the rise of technology and robots and artificial intelligence, this is displacing some traditional work. People are losing jobs in manufacturing because robots are taking over, but that's also true in medicine and a lot of other fields as well. So certainly technology is a great challenge. Globalization means we're competing with workers from all over the world, and sometimes that creates disruptions. But of course, COVID is the latest thing, and this is a massive disruption where some people have lost their jobs, and most of the rest of us are working much more from home. So that's a huge challenge these days. But I would actually say how the biggest challenge of all is the fact that Christians haven't thought enough about this, and we don't really know what it means for Jesus to be Lord of our work. We're not seeing the lessons of Scripture. And, I often say Jesus had more to say about money, property, and wealth than he did about heaven and hell and a whole lot of other subjects that are very important, but still we tend to neglect and overlook, and we don't, and a lot of times our pastors aren't really prepared by their seminary or Bible school backgrounds to see those lessons, and often our pastors don't have any experience working out in workplaces outside of church turf.
Now you list 5 steps that believers need to prepare themselves in order to be most effective in the workplace. Name some of those steps.
Well, the first step is to make the commitment, because I think just like almost anything, getting fit, for example, it's not going to happen if we approach it randomly and say, well, I better get fit this year. No, we've got to actually make a commitment. share that with others who will hold us accountable and support us. So making the commitment, I think, is the first thing to say, I am going to commit myself to honoring Jesus Christ in my work. Secondly, it's learning a better how to connect our work with our prayer life. I talk about how we're really good at emergency prayers about our work. Lord, I'm about to get fired, or Lord, they're harassing me at work, or something like that. But we need to be more proactive in our prayer life, where we pray for guidance and strength before we go to work, and in a more holistic, anticipatory way, not just throwing up our crisis prayers to the Lord. The third step is to listen. So prayer is talking to God in a simple sense, but reading scripture is listening to God. So I have a chapter about how to read our Bibles, looking for those workplace lessons. A fourth step is partnering, creating what I call a posse. It's not good for man to dwell alone. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. We need to have partners who are praying with us and supporting us. So I feel like individualism is a great enemy, really, that undermines our capacity to honor Christ in the workplace. We need prayer partners, people who understand our work, and we can share what's going on with them. And then the fifth step is what I call lifelong learning, where we as disciples of Christ, we want to get better at our jobs. So we want to study in order to be as good as we can be, deliver excellence at work. But it's also about wisdom. So much of the knowledge and information in the world today is bits and pieces of breaking news and opinions and things like this. We need a deeper kind of wisdom that comes out of Scripture, but also I recommend reading more history of our profession, for example, history and stories of Christian leaders who we can learn from. So there's a whole agenda that I describe in my fifth step there of preparation to deepen our knowledge base, and above all, our wisdom base.
Now, you refer to workplace discipleship as very hard work. Why is that?
Well, any kind of discipleship is going to have challenges. In this world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome this world. And we know the most faithful disciples in history. Well, first of all, our Lord, he was perfect in his work. He did the work of his Father. Before Jesus went to the cross, he prayed in his prayer and said, Father, I've glorified you by finishing the work that you gave me to do. And then he did the work on the cross. So there's always going to be a bearing of the cross. There will be some opposition there. We live in a fallen, broken world. And so to say, I want to follow Jesus Christ, as you said at the very beginning, there may be some opposition from people that we work with or from our bosses, but there's also just exhaustion and complexity and all of these things. But what I always say is, it may be hard, but it's much better to have Jesus walking with us through the valley of the shadow of death than to walk through it by ourselves. So even in the worst of circumstances, this is a great way to live, is to take our Lord and our faith to work with us.
And I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Absolutely.
Now, David, you say we need to focus on the character and mission of God. How would you define that?
I do. Well, because I think that what I talk about is alignment. The first challenge is to try to do our work in alignment with the work that God is already doing in the world. And so, and part of that is because we're challenged to walk in the ways of the Lord. I mean, in the Old Testament and New Testament, we're to follow after Jesus Christ. And so his agenda becomes our agenda. We're not God, but we do have the Spirit of God empowering us to do the work of the Lord. I also think from another perspective, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And we follow a working God as well as a resting God. And so God's work is the primary model for what we want to accomplish in the workplace. So what is that? If we want two words, God is the creator and the redeemer. So we want in our work, whether it's in manufacturing or raising our children or being an artist, whatever it is, we want to do what results in the creation and, you might say, the production of things that God could call good, things that are good for food, but also pleasing to the eye. So we want to study God's work as creator and then align our work as much as possible to bear witness to that creation. But God doesn't just create good things, he fixes bad things. That's where the Redeemer comes in. God is the healer of the hurting, not just the creator of initial life, but the healer of hurting life. And so we want to be creative. We want to be redemptive. But also there are other images, like God is the sustainer. So I'm saying wherever we are, wherever we work, we want to sustain the people around us, help hold them up when they're falling down. And also our business. We want to help sustain our business. We want to stand behind the products that we deliver, because God doesn't just create something and walk away. He sustains what he's made. And so we want to be creators and sustainers and redeemers. And I also, in my chapter, allude to the fact that God is also the source of wisdom. He is wisdom. And we want to be the kind of people who bring wisdom to the workplace. And God is righteousness. And so we want to be people like the prophets call for. We want to be people who stand up for justice and for fairness. If somebody's being mistreated, if our customers are getting something that's not what we promised, we want to be people who stand up for what's right and what's just. And then the sixth characteristic is God is the finisher, not just the Alpha, but the Omega. God finishes the work that he's begun in us and in the world. So we want to be the kind of people who follow through in our work and finish and bring excellence and glory to God. So that's what I mean by the character of God becomes our basic philosophy of what makes for good work, faithful to the ways of God.
So if you put it in a baseball analogy, God's not only the starting pitcher, but he's the closer as well in the game of life here. So David, why do you believe that accountability is vital to us as believers?
Well, we're accountable to God, first of all. We give an answer for how we live our lives. We believe in that from day to day, but also from the eternal perspective. You know, we're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account. So I think that accountability is important. But we also need to be accountable to other people in our lives, you know, people who are men and women of God who can hold us accountable, and we need to invite that accountability. We don't just want a posse of people who will always just praise us for whatever we do, and we want people who love us enough to say, look, I think you shouldn't go in this direction, or we share a problem and they could say, you know, I wouldn't go this direction. And so it's on that level too, accountability to God, but also to others around us.
Now, there's a vast difference between available information at our fingertips and wisdom needed to really understand it. David, how can we really develop discernment when it comes to the two?
Well, you know, I think, first of all, the fear of the Lord's the beginning of wisdom. So that is going to be the basis. My father was a mid-level accounting executive all of his life, and he didn't go to seminary, or he actually didn't even go to college. But my dad read Proverbs every morning of his life. You know, there are 31 chapters. So every day my dad read a different chapter of Proverbs every day, all of his life. And I think, you know, that's where the wisdom comes from, you know, common sense, you might say, which is not so common. But so I think the wisdom comes there, but also it comes from from perspective. You know, wisdom is from perspective, not getting lost in the details, but seeing, not just seeing the trees, but seeing the forest. And so the Bible helps us develop this kind of wisdom. It's practical knowledge and discernment. And then, of course, I also think it's from our posse, because, you know, in Romans, I love this chapter 12, where Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then he immediately says, but don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but think soberly. You have one gift, but you don't have them all. So we need that community in order to figure out what is the will of God. What is that good and acceptable and perfect thing to do in my work? I need others. I can't think more highly of just my own self than I ought to.
David, what's a good biblical insight that almost anyone can share in a secular workplace? Think of one maybe right on the top of your head.
Well, servant leadership. I mean, this is something Jesus taught. You know, people in the world love to lord it over others, but I'm your Lord, and I don't do that. I'm among you as one who serves. And we're challenged to think not how to impose our leadership and lean on people like that, like a dictator or something, but instead we're here to serve people. So yes, we do need to assert leadership in the sense of holding people accountable who are working for us, or our kids as they're growing up. but we want to do it as servants. We're really here to serve God and actually to serve others as well. So that's one thing. I think this community thing is also taught from cover to cover in the Bible, that it's not good for one to dwell alone, man or woman to dwell alone. We need others. David and Jonathan made a covenant. Ruth and Naomi made a covenant to support each other. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. So I would always argue in any workplace where I am on behalf of a collaboration and teamwork, and not just doing things all by ourselves. So there is individual responsibility and capability, but we're much stronger if we always stress the importance of teams. And I would do that in my secular workplace, you could say. I wouldn't necessarily quote the Bible initially. I'd tell them later on if people ask, well, why are you so strong on teams? I would probably say, well, it comes out of my faith. But I would promote that anywhere, on a faculty or anywhere.
David, we have about 30 seconds left in the interview here. Can you suggest quickly a way to handle workplace conflict?
Well, I love the Beatitudes as a model for our own character, which can be applied to handling conflict. So the point of the whole thing is really, I think, in number 7, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. We want people to have peace with God, but peace with each other as well. Now, how do we get there? I think the Beatitudes are a progression. So it begins in being poor in spirit. We'll never be able to help people overcome conflict if they won't be humble and say, we're messed up. We need to work at this. And then from being poor in spirit goes lamenting that poverty and brokenness. Blessed are those who mourn, being meek and gentle, not trying to be the control freak in the situation. And then pursuing what is just and righteous and true. We've got to do that, but we won't see that justice if we don't start out in openness and humility. If we just plunge in and search for justice immediately without that openness, I don't think we'll get there. But justice must be accompanied by mercy, the 5th beatitude, and purity of heart, integrity, if we want to get to number 7, which is to be a peacemaker. We never look more like the children of God than when we are peacemakers. Those who are peacemakers will be called the children of God. And then number 8 is, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this is the realism end of the Beatitudes, saying even if you work this way and try to resolve conflicts, it's not always going to work. And sometimes people are going to attack you and accuse you of bad faith, but hang in there. Keep working on God's righteousness agenda.
Some solid insight and wisdom. David Gill, author of Workplace Discipleship 101. Thanks for joining me today from Oakland, California.
It's great to be with you, Hal. Thanks so much.
We all have some regrets from our past, some more than others, and sometimes we tend to drag that baggage with us into our present life. Is there a way to forgive and redeem the past and move forward? Today's guest is Kevin Goss, a pastor and church planter in the Spokane, Washington region and author of Dry Bones, Redeeming Your Past, available at befortified.life. He joins me now from Skype. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Kevin, this book that you have written, it comes out a lot of your own personal experiences. Can you share what's happened in your own life that led you to write about the need for redemption?
Yes, about 25 years after being in ministry, I reached a point of just significant burnout and reaching the end of myself, and there were some lines that were crossed ethically and morally, and just so to speak, a collapse of sorts. And I had to walk through a restoration journey. And out of that journey over the years, God gave my wife and I an opportunity to just share some of the lessons we learned and some of the hope that we received.
What are some of the lessons that you learned in your own journey to healing?
As part of the journey to healing, I learned that, hard work, even for good things, doesn't make up for dealing with some of the things in our lives from our past or some of the challenges in the present. I learned that bitterness and frustration, if not dealt with, can become a deep root in our lives. And I also learned that sometimes our perspectives can be skewed. As one writer said, our feelings are real. They just may not always be right.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who feels that they've maybe screwed up their past so bad that there's no hope for a better future?
First, even though we can be surprised by the difficulties or the failures we face, that God wasn't surprised by them. It doesn't mean that he approved, but he can still fulfill his purpose and his will in our lives, even though it may look different than, say, our daydreams or the idealistic picture of what we thought it would look like. There is a road ahead. We just have to be ready to adapt that God may creatively do it differently.
Now, in your book, you break down three things, like into three different sections: glory days, regrets over missed opportunities, and healing from past pain. So why these three?
You know, as we walk the journey, God made it clear to us that these are three overarching themes that touch us throughout our lives. Sometimes we look back and wish we could recreate something that we used to have, and it can be frustrating, and that's that glory days. Other times it's the opposite. It's, oh, if I would have made a better decision, where would I be now? And sometimes people question life, relationships, decisions, education, career, and they think they're living a consolation prize life. And then with the past pain, whether it's things I've done or others have done to me, if not dealt with and healed from, we drag them along and they become an accumulated weight as we walk the journey of life.
You write that our decisions can either break the bonds of the past or perpetuate past failures into ongoing behavior. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, when God was talking to the prophet Jeremiah, he told him that he was going to have to sift the precious from the vile. So God places precious things in our life, yet these other factors, if not dealt with, become like a polluting influence. And so my decisions can either reinforce what is polluting my life, or they can move me in a path of obedience, restoring, and new hope in moving forward. So there's this sense that we have to recognize that I'm either going to perpetuate the past or I'm going to learn something new and a new perspective that can take me forward.
Talk to us a bit about the comparison trap. Is it because we tend to compare our lives to those around us?
Very much. We can either be, we look at people we deem as more successful than us and we view ourselves as inferior, or we covet what they have. Or I can look at somebody I think is less successful or who has failed more than I have as a way to justify maybe weaknesses or blind spots in my own life. It's not that we don't learn from others, both their successes and their failures. It's the confusion of setting up value, identity, and purpose on something other than God's plan for our lives. And so the comparison trap, what it does is it takes the eyes off of what God wants to do in my life or each person's life, and it's driving down a road with no rear view or side view mirrors. We have blind spots and we end up having relational and life crashes because we don't have perspective and the proper vision.
Interesting. I like that little, visual there. So when people look back at negative life events, there's sometimes a sense of bitterness, right? So what are some signs of bitterness and how does that affect our lives?
Some key signs is when it starts affecting the way I view the important people in my life. So a bitter person starts looking at loved ones and friends through the lens of suspicion. They have a harder time receiving and giving love, and they tend to become a cynic where someone else's life and behavior hasn't warranted it, meaning I lack trust where someone hasn't been untrustworthy. The other is that I lose the sense to be able to count the blessings for what I do have. Life is measured through, say, the glass being half empty or thinking it all the way empty, and I lose the ability to see that there are daily blessings, even though life also does have daily challenges. And those are two key factors that begin to reveal that bitterness could be rooting in someone's life.
Wow. You say that when our past needs redeeming, we try to fix people around us rather than working on ourselves.
Unfortunately, I heard one speaker say it this way: I love what the Bible says about others. I'm just not crazy about what it says about me. And one of the diverting tactics can sometimes be that if I can fix or control the world around me, I can feel better about myself, but I might be missing the point that there's things that God has to do within me. Sometimes we want to be the teacher when there are moments that God says we need to be the student, and understanding the place we are in our life and accepting that there's things we need to learn and to grow in is key to having our past redeemed.
Wow, and these are all things that you personally have experienced coming through all of this?
Yes, I spent a quarter of a century being primarily in the positions of leadership, people coming to me, expecting me to have the answers. And I went through a journey over years where God then placed me in positions of submission, of subordinate roles, where there was much for me to learn, almost like a shift in the middle of my life. And I began to see that many of the things that frustrated me had more to do with God needing to clear my perspective, deal with some things in my past, and give me fresh opportunities to move forward. So yes, all of these I had to walk through personally.
Yeah. Now, do people going through problems like this, are they able to have they sought you out personally, almost as a counselor?
There have been times, some through, through our writings, other times through speaking, and there have been other times through individual counseling that myself, along with my wife, have been able to work with individuals and couples for them to experience really God's best in their lives. We see ourselves as facilitators. We know this is a work that God needs to do in someone's life, but there are times skilled helpers make a significant difference. We know that was true in our lives, and we just want to be available to do our part, whatever God has for someone else.
That's wonderful. So getting back to that wounded feeling, when someone has seriously wounded us, it can be so hard to truly forgive, right? Can you give us an idea of how to work through the forgiveness process and what's involved?
I admit that it's a journey, but it does come with a few key principles. One, even if someone's hurt me horribly, I have to make a decision. Is Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross, is that ultimately greater than even the sins committed against me? It's easier for me to think of God forgiving me, but sometimes I'm concerned that he might forgive someone else because I feel like they might get away with it. So sometimes we hold on to things that are like, oh no, God might forgive them, kind of like Jonah, where he was concerned that God would forgive the Ninevites. And so a principle is that Jesus is even greater than their sin against me. A second is forgiveness doesn't make them right, but it does make me free. There was a wonderful pastor who his words taught me significant in that area. And third, forgiveness doesn't always mean the same relationship boundaries. They may change for the sake of safety and trust, but forgiveness is a way of the individual being free from that other person's sin against them.
That's a great nugget of wisdom there. So how do you know when you've truly forgiven somebody?
Well, I'd love to say that it's a magic moment. I would say that there's a few factors. One, when I find that negative thoughts and feelings about that person come up, that I'm more ready to bring them to the Lord and say, okay, God, I give them to you again today. Second, God begins to give an individual the ability to pray for other people that before they never thought they could pray for. And third, people are able to either move on in relationship without that person, if need be, because of healthy boundaries. And if there is the ability to reconnect where it's healthy and it's safe, they find that the road begins to restore relationship. That's case by case, depending on what has happened. But we find that some of those are the factors that we see that begin to reveal a forgiving spirit growing within us.
Interesting. You talk about the games people play in your book, especially when they're trying to justify wrong behavior. What are some of these games?
They can be very subtle, although they're noticed more than people think. People can do it with their looks, like maybe they're trying to gain more attention from other people. It can be in their body language, their words. What ends up happening is through the relationships of life, people try to get emotional and relational needs met from people for whom it's not intended. So for instance, if someone's in a position of trust or leadership like I'm in, there are certain people that I'm to serve. It's not their responsibility to meet needs within me. Part of getting away from those games is recognizing that we have to want more for people than from them, and that no relationship and no person is really ever meant to be used as a manipulation to meet an underlying need that either needs to come from God or the right person he's put in our lives.
You are full of wisdom, Kevin. Any final advice for viewers struggling with redeeming their past?
I would just want them to know that at the moment, even if they have a hard time seeing the way forward, that God does have a plan for their life. It's not a self-help statement. It's a recognition that this moment is not their destiny. And I would encourage them to take intentional steps with God and maybe skilled, trusted others so that they can see that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. It may take time, but it can happen for them.
Ah, what a positive message. And with that, it looks like we are about out of time. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege.
That was Kevin Goss, the author of Dry Bones, Redeeming Your Past, available at befortified.life. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at VCN. Thanks for watching.